between. Wherever you are, this tale will find you. Even small villages keep large secrets. The morning had come pale and rimmed with frost. Mist curled low over the cobbled street, softening the outlines of lamplight and chimney smoke. From the narrow lane beyond the harbour, the quiet rhythm of carriage wheels echoed faintly, slow, steady, deliberate. Miss Marple stepped down, her small gloved hand resting on the rail. The air smelled of salt and coal smoke, and somewhere nearby a gull gave one sharp cry before the wind carried it away. She looked up. The inn sign above her, the blue lantern, swayed on its iron bracket, the wood creaking in protest at the cold. Inside, warmth met her like a sigh. The scent of beeswax and tea leaves lingered. A clock ticked in the hall, precise and unhurried. The floorboards gave under her step, a soft groan as if the building itself was waking. The innkeeper appeared, a tall man with spectacles and the slightly stooped manner of one who spent long hours keeping accounts. His smile was polite, practiced. "Room ready?" "Since dawn, ma'am," he said. "Fires lit, hot water just brought up. You'll find the sea view quite peaceful." She inclined her head. Peaceful sounds promising. Her voice carried no irony, but her eyes, pale and observant, moved across the counter to the brass bell that hadn't been polished properly. A faint smudge of ash near its base caught her notice, a detail others might miss. From the back, a maid hurried forward with a folded towel. "Welcome, miss. I'll show you up." The girl's shoes clicked briskly on the wooden stairs, but her hands trembled slightly. Miss Marple followed at an easy pace, her steps measured, her eyes taking in the framed photograph on the landing, a group of sailors standing beside a lifeboat. One figure scratched faintly where the varnish had peeled. At the top floor, the maid paused beside a door marked Room 3. She hesitated before turning the handle, then forced a smile. "We've had fewer guests this season. Seas turned rough early." Miss Marple nodded, setting her carpet bag neatly on the table by the window. Through the glass she could see the line of grey sea merging with the sky, a single gull balanced on the post by the shore road. The horizon looked calm, but the waves carried a strange regularity, as if rehearsing for something yet to come. She unbuttoned her coat, taking in the warmth from the small fire. The kettle on the grate rattled faintly as it began to boil. Miss Marple smiled to herself, a quiet, knowing smile. She had always trusted the first feeling a place gave her. And this one, she thought, was listening. Some rooms remember more than they reveal. Morning came gently over the village, pale sunlight washing the rooftops in a clean gold sheen. Inside the inn, the rhythm of breakfast had already begun, a soft clink of silver spoons, the quiet scrape of chairs, and the low murmur of conversation rising and falling like waves beyond the window. Miss Marple sat at a small table near the fire, her cup of tea cooling beside a plate of toast she had yet to touch. The scent of marmalade and coal smoke mingled in the air, cozy and familiar. A postman laughed somewhere near the counter, his cap pushed back as he told the innkeeper some cheerful nonsense about a parcel gone astray. It was, as mornings went, perfectly ordinary. And that, to Miss Marple, was what made it interesting. She looked up as the maid entered from the back passage, dusting a stack of ledgers kept on a narrow shelf by the window. The girl's face was pink from the chill air, her hands quick and efficient. Still, there was something hurried in her movements, the kind of haste born not from work, but from worry. "Good morning, my dear," said Miss Marple kindly. "Good morning, ma'am," replied the girl, offering a brief, nervous smile before turning back to her task. The postman's laughter faded as he left, door closing with a jingle of brass bells. Silence settled in its place, broken only by the steady tick of the hall clock and the whisper of the maid's cloth over the ledgers. Miss Marple's eyes wandered, seemingly idle, until they paused on the account book open upon the counter, a neat page of figures in tidy columns, dated and initialed all perfectly proper, except, she noticed, the ink. It was darker than the rest, still glistening faintly at the edge of a downstroke. She leaned a little closer. "That's a fine, bold hand," she said conversationally. "A new pen nib, perhaps?" The maid blinked, startled. "Oh, yes, ma'am. Mr. Fallon opened a new bottle this morning. said the old one had gone thick. Indeed, murmured Miss Marple. Her tone was mild, her gaze not. A wise precaution. Ink can reveal more than we mean it to. The maid's eyes lowered again. Her duster slowed, just slightly, before resuming its rhythm. Miss Marple smiled to herself, folding her napkin neatly. She had learned long ago that guilt seldom announces itself with noise. It appears instead in the smallest hesitation, the faintest tremor of the hand. Outside, the postman's whistle carried down the lane. The sea breeze followed through the open window, cool and salted, stirring the pages of the ledger just enough to reveal another sheet beneath faintly smudged, half-blotted, as if someone had tried to erase a mistake. Miss Marple stood, smoothing her skirt, and moved toward the door. "Tell Mr. Fallon the tea was excellent," she said gently. "I will, ma'am," murmured the girl, eyes still on the ledgers. As the door closed behind her, the room seemed to sigh. The fire crackled softly. The maid's duster paused again mid-sweep. Order is pleasant, until it trembles. The morning had settled into that soft, deceptive calm, peculiar to small villages, everything appearing still, everything pretending to be ordinary. Yet as Miss Marple stepped into the hallway of the Blue Lantern, a faint flicker from the gaslight caught her eye. It dimmed, then flared again, as though the flame had lost its confidence. A thin draught passed through the letter slot, rustling the folded notices pinned beside the door. The movement made a dry, whispering sound, paper brushing against paper. Miss Marple paused, her hand halfway to her glove button. The chill in the air was sharper than before, thin, metallic, with an edge she could not quite name. The porter appeared from the corridor, wiping his hands on a folded cloth. His face was ruddy from the cold, his voice steady but edged with unease. "Strange morning," he muttered. "Can't seem to keep the flame steady. First it's too bright, then nearly gone altogether. Bad for the fixtures, I'd say." Miss Marple nodded slightly, her gaze on the wall lamp. "Perhaps the draught," she suggested. "Perhaps," he said, though he didn't sound convinced. The cloth in his hands twisted once, then again. "Feels different, though. Bit of a smell, too, like—" He hesitated, sniffed, and frowned. "Gas," said Miss Marple quietly. They both stood still for a moment. The sound of the clock in the hall grew louder by contrast, each tick clear and separate. From somewhere beyond the door came the muffled chime of a bicycle bell, cheerful, oblivious, utterly at odds with the silence indoors. Miss Marple turned slightly, following the faint trace of the scent down the corridor. It was stronger, near. The storage door beside the office, a small wooden panel that should have been shut, but now hung half-latched, a thin line of darkness showing between frame and hinge. She placed her gloved hand against it. The wood was cold. The handle gave beneath her touch, the latch giving a small metallic click. She opened it just enough to peer inside. Darkness, stillness, the air, close and heavy. Then, unmistakable, a stronger whiff of gas, sharp and sour beneath the sweetness of the morning tea that lingered in her coat. She closed the door firmly and stepped back. "Best leave that for now," she said softly. "And perhaps open a window, Mr. Hall." The porter nodded, already moving to obey, his boots heavy on the floorboards. The window stuck once before giving way, a squeal of wood against damp frame. Fresh air came in slow, deliberate, carrying the scent of seaweed and frost. Miss Marple stood very still, her eyes on the half-latched door. She did not speak for several seconds. The light above them steadied, no longer flickering, but the sense of wrongness remained. "Strange morning indeed," she murmured. The porter, misunderstanding, gave a faint, nervous laugh. Miss Marple did not join him. Her thoughts had already moved on, circling the invisible edges of something unseen, something waiting. Some smells never belong in daylight. The knock came once firm, official, and then again, louder. No reply. The corridor seemed to absorb the sound, swallowing it whole. Constable Fred Locke frowned and glanced at Miss Marple, who stood a few paces behind him, hands folded neatly over her handbag. Her expression was calm, but her eyes were not. They were fixed on the closed door of the post office sorting room, a door that should have opened at the first call. Fred rapped again. "Mr. Stokes? It's Constable Locke. You all right in there, sir?" Nothing. Only the faint hum of the gaslight overhead and the low hiss of something not quite silence, not quite sound. He tried the handle. It moved barely half an inch before stopping with a dull scrape of metal. "Jammed?" he muttered. "Bolt must be across." He pressed his ear to the wood. The air on the other side seemed heavy, muffled. Miss Marple tilted her head. "Do you hear that?" she asked softly. Fred listened again. A faint hiss, steady and unbroken, came from within. "Gas," he said grimly. "Right, everyone stand back." The small cluster of villagers who had gathered Elsie Carr, the clerk, the porter, and a wide-eyed telegram boy retreated a few steps. The boy's bicycle bell jingled faintly where it leaned against the counter, a bright sound out of place in the hush. Fred squared his shoulders, tested the handle once more, then braced himself. "I'll have to force it." The first blow of his shoulder against the wood made a dull, hollow thud. Dust fell from the frame. The second produced a splintering crack, the smell of old paint and dust bursting into the air. On the third, the door gave way with a loud snap and swung inward. A rush of stale air poured out, thick with the unmistakable sting of gas. The light inside was dim and yellowed. Fred coughed, pressing his sleeve to his mouth. "Open a window." He strode to the heater in the corner and turned the brass valve shut with one quick motion. The hissing stopped. Miss Marple stepped forward carefully, her eyes adjusting to the gloom. The small room was neat, too neat. Ledgers stacked evenly, stamps arranged in rows on the counter, the order of habit undisturbed except for the man slumped forward at his desk. Harold Stokes's head rested on his arms, one hand curled loosely around his pen. Papers were spread beneath him, his neat handwriting running to a shaky line near the end. His spectacles had slipped to one side. Fred approached slowly, his boots creaking on the wooden floor. He touched the man's shoulder, then withdrew his hand immediately. "Cold," he said quietly. Miss Marple's gaze moved from the extinguished heater to the closed window, to the latch still drawn from the inside. A perfect picture of finality, but her expression remained thoughtful. She reached out and gently righted the fallen spectacles. The air still held that faint, bitter tang. He wasn't breathing, and the door was locked from within. "Doctor." Haydock arrived within minutes, his boots leaving clean, square prints on the slush outside before he stepped into the dim warmth of the sorting room. The scent of gas still lingered faintly in the air, mixed with the sharper note of ink and cold paper. He crossed to the desk without hesitation, kneeling beside the still figure of Harold Stokes. The doctor's hands were steady, precise. He touched the man's wrist, then the side of his neck, and finally drew back with a slow shake of the head. "Too late by several hours," he murmured. His breath made small clouds in the chill of the room. The gas heater in the corner gave a tired sigh, a faint hiss continuing despite the valve now turned off. Dr. Haydock moved closer, crouching to examine the pipe and pilot light. "Faulty vent, I'd say. Carbon monoxide buildup. Common enough in old systems like this." Miss Marple stood a few feet away, hands folded neatly before her. Her gaze wasn't on the body, but on the small window above the desk. Its glass was clouded with condensation not from the morning chill, but from the warmth trapped inside. She traced the pattern with her eyes, heavy at the bottom, faint at the top, almost as if someone had leaned close and breathed there. "Accident," said the doctor, standing and brushing his knees. "Poor man must have nodded off over his accounts. Never knew what happened." "Maybe," Miss Marple said quietly. Dr. Haydock turned, raising an eyebrow. "You doubt it?" She smiled faintly. "I doubt many things, Doctor. It's how one learns the truth." Fred Locke, the young constable, was taking notes in his small book, brow furrowed with the effort of doing everything properly. "No signs of struggle," he said aloud. "Door bolted from inside. Window shut. No glass broken. Nothing moved." "Yes," Miss Marple replied softly. "That's what troubles me." The doctor frowned. "Troubles you? I should think that confirms an accident." Perhaps, she said again, her voice mild. But nature is rarely so tidy, don't you think? Accidents, in my experience, leave things untidy. A chair pushed back, a cup spilled, something fallen. Here, everything seems perfectly arranged. The room was silent, except for the slow ticking of the wall clock. Outside, the faint cry of a gull came and went, swallowed by the wind. Dr. Haydock sighed, pulling off his gloves. "You've read too many detective novels, Miss Marple." "Possibly," she replied, eyes still on the window, "though I do find real life insists on imitating them." Fred glanced up from his notebook. "You think it's murder?" "I think," she said, "that the good Mr. Stokes was a very careful man, and careful men seldom make careless mistakes, especially the kind that kill them." Her gaze returned to the desk, to the papers arranged as neatly as ever. The ink had dried perfectly. Not a blot, not a smear. Sometimes death prefers order to chaos. Constable Fredlock moved carefully about the room, pencil in hand, notebook open, his young face set in professional concentration. The formality of it seemed to steady him. He spoke softly as he wrote, the way a clerk might read his sums aloud. Desk in order, gas heater secure, window locked, door damaged on forced entry. Papers. He stopped mid-sentence, his pencil tip hovering above the page. Drawer, half open. He crouched beside the desk and pulled the drawer outward another inch. It stuck slightly, then slid free with a faint squeak. Inside lay a handful of envelopes, a ledger, and a small wooden box with a postal seal carved into its lid. The smell of paper and dried ink mingled with something gentler lavender, faint but deliberate, the kind often used to keep moths away from stationery. Miss Marple moved closer, her quiet steps almost soundless. She leaned forward, hands clasped lightly in front of her. "Registered post?" she asked. Fred nodded, rifling through the envelopes with care. "Yes, ma'am. 4 entries logged for yesterday, all from London firms." "And all still here?" He checked again, his finger counting the envelopes in the drawer, 1, 2, 3, then paused. His brow furrowed. "No, wait. Only 3. Marple's voice was calm, but her tone sharpened with interest. "You're certain?" "Quite certain. I remember the tally in the ledger earlier. 4 received, 1 uncollected." Said Miss Marple, glancing toward the pile of papers on the desk. "Then where did the 4th go?" Fred hesitated. "Could have been collected late yesterday evening. Mr. Stokes often stayed past closing time. Maybe someone called in." Miss Marple's gaze drifted over the room, the neat piles of correspondence, the clean blotter, the perfectly aligned pen. Everything spoke of order and caution. A man who accounted for every item, every signature, every penny. A missing letter did not fit that kind of man. She bent slightly, examining the drawer front. The thin outline of dust suggested it had been closed until very recently. "Strange," she murmured. "He must have opened it after you left him last, Miss Carr." Elsie Carr, who had been standing by the door, dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. "Yes, ma'am. He said he had a few late postings to process. I never imagined." Her voice trailed off into a whisper. Fred straightened, shutting his notebook. "Could be the missing one was delivered by mistake." Marple shook her head faintly. "A registered letter? Those are signed?" 4, logged, and counted twice. "Mistakes, Mr. Locke, tend to happen where there is haste. But this," she gestured at the desk, "shows no haste at all." Fred sighed. "Then we'll have to find who it was addressed to." "Yes," she said softly, "and who knew it was here?" The air in the little room felt heavier now, though the gas had long since cleared. Even the ticking clock seemed to grow slower, as if listening. Miss Marple's eyes rested again on the open drawer, a simple gap in the wood, and yet it seemed to widen as she stared, like an unanswered question that refused to close. Missing things leave louder echoes than noise. The constable had moved on to the second drawer, noting each item with the same care he might give to a church ledger. Stamps, envelopes, account slips, all tidy, all labelled. But as the papers shifted, a small leather-bound book slid free and landed on the desk with a soft, dignified thud. Miss Marple's gaze settled on it immediately. The cover was worn smooth, edges burnished by years of use. When she opened it, the faint aroma of dust and gum Arabic rose from the pages, the scent peculiar to stamp albums, that mix of paper and faint glue memory. Inside, the rows of stamps were perfectly ordered. Each small square framed in black ink, each caption in Mr. Stokes's tidy hand. Penny red, 1,841. Halfpenny green, 1,880. Jubilee issue, 1,887. And then the small irregularity that broke the piece. A single penny black, older than the rest, had been placed in the wrong slot. The caption beneath it read, "Replica, not genuine." Yet the dark sheen of the paper, the faint embossing along the edge, told a different story. "Odd choice," murmured Miss Marple. Fred leaned in. "Looks proper enough to me. What's wrong with it?" "Everything about it is right," she said quietly. "That's what's wrong." A soft clearing of the throat made them turn. Mr. Hale, the stamp dealer from the high street, stood near the door, gloves in one hand, hat in the other, his expression one of polite curiosity. "You found his collection, then?" he said smoothly. "Fine taste, old Stokes. I advised him on most of his pieces." Miss Marple smiled without warmth. "How convenient, Mr. Hale. You must know it well." He spread his hands lightly. "Only to admire, of course. We shared an interest violently, is a quiet man's passion." "Indeed," she replied, still looking down at the misfiled stamp. "And yet this particular quiet man seems to have mislaid his order." He stepped forward, his shoes making no sound on the rug. "Surely nothing sinister in that, Miss Marple. Collectors are known to, rearrange their treasures now and then." "Rearrangement is one thing," she said. "Substitution is another." The dealer's smile thinned. "You're suggesting forgery?" "I'm suggesting Mr. Stokes would not mistake a replica for an original, nor, I think, would he display the reverse." Fred turned the page gently. The stamp's back was faintly marked, a pale, sticky residue, as though it had been lifted and pressed again. Hale shrugged. "Age, perhaps. Or tampering," said Miss Marple softly. "Someone replaced what they couldn't afford to lose." For a long moment, no one spoke. The air in the small room seemed to hum with quiet tension, the kind that hangs between civility and accusation. Miss Marple closed the album carefully and laid it flat upon the desk. "Beauty and order," she said almost to herself, "often hides theft, especially when the thief values neatness above honesty." Hale gave a polite nod, though his jaw tightened. "You do have a suspicious nature, madam." "I prefer the term observant," she replied. "Suspicion tends to follow where evidence leads." Her eyes lingered once more on the misfiled penny black. Its perfection, she thought, was its flaw. Beauty and order often hides theft. The desk had fallen silent again, save for the faint rasp of paper under fingertips. The constable's careful inventory trailed off when Miss Marple drew the ledger nearer, her delicate hands handling it as if it were a fragile thing, a diary of someone's secrets, rather than a mere account book. Each page bore the same precise script. Narrow columns of dates, initials and registered numbers, every entry written in Mr. Stokes's distinctive, even hand. The ink tone matched line by line until the final page. There, in the middle of a half-completed list, a single line stood apart. The lettering was uniform, flat, and too mechanical to be human. "Typed," murmured Miss Marple. "How peculiar." Fred leaned closer, squinting. "Typed? You mean someone used a machine? Looks neat enough to me." "Neatness," she said quietly, "is sometimes camouflage." She bent nearer, her spectacles glinting as she studied the ribbon marks. The faint smudge of excess ink along one edge suggested haste, perhaps even inexperience. "Typewriter ribbon nearly dry," she murmured. The letters E and A struck faintly uneven pressure. She turned to Fred. "Who here owns a typewriter?" Fred looked uncertain. "Well, not Mr. Stokes, far as I know. He always wrote everything by hand. Claimed it kept his mind sharp." The air shifted slightly as someone cleared his throat. A polite, deliberate sound, that drew both their eyes. Mr. Hale, the stamp dealer, stood near the window, his hat now resting on the sill. His expression was bland, practiced. "If you're referring to mechanical instruments, Miss Marple," he said lightly, "I do carry one. A small Underwood for correspondence. My clients prefer their valuations in print. Looks more official, you know." Miss Marple gave him a mild smile, the kind that never reached her eyes. "Indeed, and I imagine being portable it travels easily?" "Quite," he said. "A man in my trade must keep records." She straightened, closing the ledger slowly. "Records are curious things, Mr. Hale. They keep our truths safe, but also our lies. The trick lies in knowing which line tells the story." The dealer adjusted his cufflinks, his movements measured. "I assure you, madam, I have nothing to hide." Fred, glancing between them, frowned. "Seems odd, though. Why'd a typed line appear here if Stokes didn't use a machine?" "Perhaps someone else wanted it to appear official," said Miss Marple softly. She tapped the page. "Note the entry's timing the last before his death, and the address listed here." She read it aloud, voice calm but pointed. "Hale & Co., fine philately." The dealer's smile faltered, just slightly enough for her to see it. "Coincidence," he said quietly. "Perhaps," she replied, her eyes steady on his face. "But coincidences are terribly inefficient things. They rarely type their own names." The constable scribbled a note, uncertain, while the gaslight flickered above them, its faint hum filling the pause. Miss Marple closed the ledger and rested her hand on the cover. "Machines," she said gently, "have a way of speaking when people won't. Machines speak when people won't." Elsie Carr stood by the counter, her hands clutching the edge as though it might steady her. The pale light from the frosted window fell across her face, showing eyes that had not slept. Her apron was tidy, her hair pinned with care, but her composure trembled like a candle flame caught by wind. Miss Marple sat opposite her, calm as ever, a small notebook resting closed upon her lap. "Now, my dear," she said gently, "let's begin again. You mentioned a missing letter." Elsie nodded, swallowing hard. "My aunt's money order, miss. It never came." Her voice was low, the words pressed together. "She sends one every month without fail first week, but this time—" She stopped her, fingers tightening on the counter. Marple's eyes softened. "And you're quite sure it was posted?" "Yes, ma'am. Aunt Clara showed me the receipt when she visited last month. Said she'd already written the envelope. I've looked through all the incoming post twice over. It never arrived." The constable shifted awkwardly nearby, his pencil hovering above his page. "Could have gone astray in transit," he offered. "Happens now and again." Miss Marple didn't look away from Elsie. "And you told someone here?" Elsie hesitated. "Only Mr. Bryce." "Mr. Bryce," Marple repeated softly. "He assists with deliveries, does he not?" "Yes, ma'am. Been with us nearly a year. He sometimes collects the post bags when Mr. Stokes works late." "And what did he say when you mentioned it?" "He said he'd check the records." Her tone faltered. "But he never did. Said later it was probably a clerical slip." Marple nodded slowly. Her gaze drifted toward the ledger on the desk, the same one with the typed entry. She flipped a few pages, scanning dates. There, beside a faint stain of dried ink, the name Carr, Clara money order, £10, appeared in neat handwriting. The line below it, however, was fainter, nearly smudged out. A different pen stroke. "Did Mr. Stokes handle these himself?" she asked. "Yes," Elsie replied. "Always. He said registered money must pass through his hands directly." Marple leaned closer. The ink smelled faintly of starch and lavender soap. Elsie's soap, the same she used in her apron wash. But the smudge beneath, darker and heavier, carried another scent, metallic, like typewriter ribbon. "Curious," she murmured. "Someone tried to copy this line, and failed." Fredlock frowned. "You mean forged it?" "Perhaps replaced it," she said. "One promise erased, another written." Elsie's breath came shallow. "You mean someone took it?" Marple met her gaze kindly. "Perhaps not took, my dear. Redirected. Money has a way of changing its destination when eyes aren't watching. The girl's hand trembled again. She looked at the ledger, then toward the door that led to the back office. "Did you ever see Mr. Bryce near this drawer?" asked Marple. Elsie hesitated too long before answering. "He tidied it sometimes." Marple's voice was soft but firm. How thoughtful of him. The pages of the ledger rustled faintly as she closed it. Outside, the postman's whistle sounded once, distant and bright, a sound of routine continuing, indifferent to loss. Promises travel faster than paper. The sky had turned pale and clear, the sort of brittle winter light that sharpens everything it touches. The snow lay smooth across the post office yard, bright enough to sting the eyes. Constable Fred Locke led the way, his boots crunching a steady rhythm over the hard ground. Miss Marple followed at a thoughtful pace, her small figure wrapped in grey wool, her footsteps leaving neat, deliberate marks behind her. "Tracks start here," Fred said, gesturing toward a set of prints leading from the back steps. "Fresh, too, must have been some time after midnight." Miss Marple bent slightly, peering at the impressions. The snow was shallow but firm. Each print was clear, the heel and toe distinct. "A man's shoe," she said softly. "Size 9, perhaps 10. The strides even. Not running, not staggering." Fred nodded, noting it down. "They go straight to the rear door." The two of them followed the trail. The prints led in a single line to the back of the building, stopping just before the old parcel hatch built into the wall. The door itself was bolted from within, the frame untouched, the key still hanging in the lock. Fred frowned. No return prints. Whoever came out didn't go back. Or, Miss Marple said gently, whoever went in never truly left. He looked up sharply. "You think this was the killer's way in?" "Perhaps," she murmured. "But let's not jump. Truth, I've found, is a patient thing." She crouched beside the last footprint. The snow had melted slightly in one spot, forming a shallow hollow, as if someone had knelt. Her gloved fingers brushed the edge delicately. "See here," she said. "Not just a boot, a knee mark. Someone knelt here, perhaps to reach the hatch." Fred leaned over her shoulder. "Why kneel?" "To pass something through, I imagine," she said. "Or retrieve it." Her eyes flicked toward the small iron flap. It was dusted with frost, but when she pressed it lightly, it lifted without resistance. Inside was darkness, the narrow space between wall panels, used for parcels in the old days. "Still open," she noted. "And look, a smear of soot along the inside edge. Someone's sleeve, perhaps. Or a glove." Fred reached forward, running his hand over the iron rim. "Cold," he muttered. "But you're right, it's been touched. Recent." "Indeed," said Miss Marple. "The same soot I saw on the bell this morning." He frowned. "You mean the one in the hall?" "The very one." She rose carefully, brushing snow from her skirt. "Our intruder was tidy, but not perfect. Even careful feet leave secrets behind." Fred glanced once more at the unbroken snow stretching beyond the last print. "So where did he go then? Vanished into thin air?" Miss Marple's eyes softened. "No, Mr. Locke. Vanishing rarely means disappearing. It often means standing very still until no one's looking." The constable looked uneasy, scanning the blank white yard. Somewhere in the distance, a crow called once, the sound crisp as the frost beneath their feet. Even careful feet leave secrets behind. The parcel hatch sat low in the back wall of the post office, a small iron square set into the brick, no larger than a writing slate. Its latch was black with age, the paint worn smooth by years. Of use. Miss Marple ran her gloved fingers along the edge and felt the cold bite of metal. The air here was sharper, the faint scent of soot mingling with damp mortar and snow. Constable Fred Locke crouched beside her. "Never thought folk still used this thing," he said. "I figured it was sealed up years ago." "Not quite," Miss Marple murmured. She pulled the latch gently. It lifted with a reluctant squeak. A faint mark, almost invisible unless one knew where to look, streaked the inside edge, a dark smear against pale frost. She leaned closer, examining it with a small frown. "Soot," she said quietly. "Fresh, too. Someone passed something through here last night." Fred sniffed. Could have been the furnace smoke. Wind carries it. Perhaps, she replied, but the wind doesn't leave fingerprints. He blinked. Fingerprints? She smiled faintly. Only a manner of speaking. See how it drags upward? Someone's hand brushed it while lifting the hatch. The constable stood, rubbing the back of his neck. Could have been the victim himself. Miss Marple's eyes were steady on the dark opening. Or someone pretending to be him. A soft footstep behind them broke the quiet. They turned to see Mr. Butter. Hale, the stamp dealer, standing a few paces away. His fine leather gloves looked almost too new against the weathered brick. "Ah," he said easily. "Still examining the old relics, are we? Fine piece of Victorian craft, that hatch. They built things properly, then solid, secure, dignified." Miss Marple's tone was mild. "So I see. You're familiar with such fittings, Mr. Hale?" He chuckled lightly. "One develops an eye for detail in my profession. Locks, hinges, metals, all tell a story, don't they?" "They do," she said softly, though sometimes the story isn't one the owner would care to read. He tilted his head, still smiling, but the movement was just a touch too slow, too deliberate. "You think it has relevance to poor Stokes's death?" "I think," said Miss Marple, "that someone used it to move something small, perhaps something flat, something valuable from this side to the other, without being seen." The dealer's gaze shifted briefly toward the snow at his feet, where the faint outline of a boot mark blurred into melting frost. "A fascinating idea," he said, "though hardly practical." "Oh, practicality rarely stops people," she replied, "especially those who believe themselves clever." Fred looked between them uncertainly. "You mean whoever killed Stokes passed something through that hole?" Miss Marple let the hatch fall shut with a soft clang. "Perhaps not the killer, Mr. Locke," she said, "but the cause." The dealer gave a polite bow. "You have a sharp mind, madam. I admire it." She met his eyes evenly. "Admiration," she said, "is often what guilt uses to hide its reflection." Her gaze drifted once more to the hatch, the old metal catching what little sunlight there was, its edges still darkened by the trace of an unseen hand. Old buildings remember trespass better than people. The small office was quiet, except for the faint, mechanical rhythm of the adding machine. Its keys still ticked softly, as though someone had been working moments before. The steady sound click, pause, click, echoed in the confined air like the beat of a tiny clock that hadn't realized its master was gone. Miss Marple stood before it, head slightly tilted, her eyes narrowing at the faint sheen of black ribbon running across the spool. "Strange," she murmured. "It's still loaded. Mr. Stokes was careful he would have covered it after use." Dr. Haydock, who had returned for a final examination, joined her side. His coat brushed against the desk, scattering a few loose figures. "I'd assumed he'd been balancing the books," he said. "Looks harmless enough. Harmless things often." "Ah," Miss Marple replied. She reached down, lifting the ribbon gently between gloved fingers. One end was a rich, fresh black, the other faded to grey with use. Between the two sections ran a curious line, darker, glossier, and slightly sticky. She brought it closer, the faintest bitter scent reaching her nose. "Half new, half old," she murmured. "Someone replaced part of it." Fred Locke leaned forward. "Would that matter?" "Perhaps not to a clerk," she said, "but quite a bit to a chemist or a murderer." Dr. Haydock frowned and stepped nearer. "Let me see." He leaned over, sniffing the ribbon cautiously. The moment the air hit the strip, his expression changed. His jaw tightened. His voice dropped. "Good heavens," he whispered. "Cyanide. That smell almonds." The constable took a half step back. "You mean poison? In the ribbon?" "Yes," said the doctor grimly. "Though faint now. Enough residue to prove it. I've seen the same used in experiments, vapor that kills when confined in a small space." Miss Marple nodded slowly. "A deadly ink, then. Death written line by line." Fred blinked, confused. "But why in the ribbon?" "Imagine," she said softly, "someone leaning close to read a ledger, the air still and warm, the machine before him. Hours of careful work, one key at a time, breathing what he cannot see." Dr. Haydock set the ribbon down carefully. It would take time, minutes, perhaps longer. The killer wouldn't need to stay. Miss Marple's eyes lingered on the desk, the faint dusting of powder along the metal arms of the machine, the untouched paper roll still threaded through. Methodical, she said. Cold. Someone who valued precision and patience. Fred rubbed the back of his neck. Could the dealer have done it? Hale. She did not answer at once. Instead, she stared at the black ribbon gleaming faintly under the lamp. He understands ink, she said at last, and the worth of things printed. The doctor exhaled slowly, the truth beginning to settle among them like dust. Ingenious, he said quietly, and merciless. Miss Marple placed the ribbon back in its cradle, closing the lid of the machine with a gentle click. The sound echoed like a final keystroke, the end of a grim equation. Death was printed line by line. The sound of small boots came tapping across the threshold, breaking the hush that had settled over the post office. The messenger boy, thin, freckled, and red-eared from the cold, stood in the doorway, his cap in his hands. His breathing carried the uneven rhythm of someone who had run part of the way and then thought better of it. "Beg pardon, miss," he said, glancing between Miss Marple and the constable. "I was told to come. Thought you'd want to know there were sparks on the telegraph wire last night." "Sparks?" repeated Fredlock. "What sort of sparks?" "Blue ones," the boy said eagerly, his eyes bright, despite the chill. Like tiny flames they were. Jumping along the wire behind the post yard. Saw it myself. I did. On my way home about 10. Miss Marple looked up from the desk, her expression mild but intent. "Blue flames, you say? How curious." The boy nodded, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "Never seen 'em like that before, ma'am. Thought it was lightning at first, but there weren't no thunder." Fred frowned. "Could have been static, or frost, or interference," Miss Marple said softly. "The telegraph line connects through the alarm box, does it not, Mr. Locke?" He hesitated. "Aye, that's right. Runs straight into the main office wall. If sparks were showing then—" He stopped, realizing the implication. "Then the line was tampered with." The messenger blinked. "Tampered, sir?" Fred nodded slowly. "Someone must have grounded it. That'd cut off any signal." "Exactly," Miss Marple murmured. "No alarm, no warning. And if anyone came or went during the night, no telegraph would have carried the call." Dr. Haydock, who had remained quiet until now, adjusted his spectacles. "You mean someone disabled the line before the death occurred?" "I mean," said Miss Marple, "that someone planned very carefully to keep silence on their side of the wall." From the far end of the room came the faint scrape of leather mister. Hale, the stamp dealer, standing with folded arms, his face composed but pale beneath its polish. His gaze drifted toward the window, avoiding hers. Fred caught it. "You know anything about wires, Mr. Hale?" The dealer gave a short laugh, too casual to sound natural. "Hardly, my good man. My trade's in paper, not electricity." Miss Marple's eyes were kind, but her voice was cool. "Yet both rely on connections, don't they? And both can carry messages that travel farther than intended." He said nothing. The ticking of the hall clock filled the silence like slow, measured footsteps. The messenger boy shuffled nervously. "Ought I tell the others, miss?" "Yes," said Miss Marple. "And thank you for your care. It's a fine thing to notice what others pass by." The boy nodded, grateful for the kindness, and hurried out into the snow. Fred closed his notebook. So the alarm wire was cut. "Disabled," Miss Marple corrected. "Not broken, just silenced. A difference worth noting." She turned toward the window, where the faint reflection of the blue sky shimmered against the frost-streaked glass. "It's always the quietest nights," she said softly, "that hide the brightest sparks. The quietest nights often hide the brightest sparks." The small parlor off the post office had grown dim by late afternoon, its single window clouded with frost. The fire crackled fitfully, sending out a low, steady warmth that did little to soften the tension in the air. Elsie Carr sat on the edge of a wooden chair, her hands trembling in her lap. Her eyes were red from crying, but she looked as though she had no more tears left to give. Miss Marple sat opposite her, the firelight reflected in her spectacles. Between them lay a small blue savings book, its cover creased and smudged, the corner of one page torn clean away. The silence stretched, unbroken except for the faint hiss of the coals. "Now, my dear," Miss Marple said softly, "no one's here to scold you. Just tell me what you know." Elsie's voice came in small, ragged bursts. "I didn't mean it wasn't meant to happen like this. Mr. Stokes trusted me. He let me help with the accounts sometimes, said I was careful." "You are careful," Miss Marple said. "That's what makes this so hard for you, isn't it?" The girl looked down. Her fingers fumbled with the book's torn edge. "The page. It was the one with my account number. I ripped it out. I thought if I burned it, no one would ever see." Miss Marple reached forward, taking the book gently from her hands. She opened it near the fire, holding the torn page close to the heat. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, faint writing began to appear ghostly, brown lines forming numbers and words. Fredlock let out a low whistle. "Invisible ink," he said. "No," Miss Marple murmured. "Ordinary ink washed once and dried again. Heat brings back what guilt tried to erase." The faint figures grew clearer. Withdrawals £20, £15, £10. Each amount carefully written, then crossed out as if someone had tried to deny it. Dr. Haydock, standing by the hearth, looked grim. "You took it?" Elsie nodded, her voice a whisper. "I only borrowed it. My brother, he's sick, sir. Needed a doctor in London. I thought I could repay it before anyone knew, but the order didn't come. Aunt Clara's money never came." Miss Marple's voice was calm. "So, you told Mr. Bryce?" "He said he could help me replace the money," said he'd handle it with Mr. Stokes himself. I believed him. Her shoulders shook. "Then Mr. Stokes found out?" "I heard them arguing. I ran before he could see me." Marple closed the book slowly. "And the next morning, Mr. Stokes was dead." Elsie buried her face in her hands. "I swear I never meant harm. I just wanted to put it right." Miss Marple's expression softened, but her voice stayed even. "Guilt is a poor accountant, my dear. It always adds more than it subtracts." The fire popped, sending a small spray of sparks into the grate. Elsie's sobs quieted, replaced by the rhythmic tick of the mantel clock. Miss Marple placed the book on the table, the exposed figures glimmering faintly in the firelight marks of choices that could never be unwritten. Guilt writes slower than innocence. The evening shadows stretched long across the post office floor as Constable Fredlock placed the leather case upon the desk. Its brass clasps glinted faintly in the lamplight. The room smelled of ink, soot, and cold air seeping through the cracks, but beneath it all lingered something bitter and unmistakable. Almonds. Mr. Hale, the stamp dealer, stood a few feet away, his gloves neatly folded, his face as smooth and composed as ever. Yet there was a new tension in the air, something fragile and brittle beneath his polished calm. Fred cleared his throat. "You'll want to witness this, Miss Marple." She nodded once, her expression mild. "Do carry on, Mr. Locke." The constable undid the first clasp, then the second. The hinges creaked softly as the case opened. Inside lay a meticulous arrangement. Rows of envelopes, a small ledger bound in red cloth, a parcel of rare stamps, and, tucked neatly in one corner, a slim glass vial wrapped in tissue paper. Fred lifted it gingerly. "Chemicals, ma'am." He unscrewed the cap, sniffed, and recoiled. "Same smell, almonds." Dr. Haydock stepped forward. "Cyanide residue. The same scent as on the adding machine. Ribbon." Miss Marple inclined her head. "Just as I thought." Fred reached further into the case and pulled out a small wooden matchbox. It rattled softly in his hand. When he opened it, a fine white dust clung to the edges. "Same again," he muttered. Hale's voice broke the silence, smooth but lower now. "Surely, Miss Marple, you don't believe that I don't believe anything," she interrupted gently. "I simply observe, and what I observe is that Mr. Stokes was killed by precision, a mind that values order, patience, and detail. You, Mr. Hale, have all three." He gave a short, bitter laugh. "You flatter me, madam." "Not at all," she said. "It must have taken great skill to soak the typewriter ribbon without leaving a trace. You used your knowledge of inks, your familiarity with post office procedures, and your access through trade. You even altered the ledger to conceal the missing letter, the one that never reached poor Elsie's aunt." Hale's smile faded. His eyes flicked toward the case, then away. Fred folded his arms. "No use denying it, sir. Everything points your way." The dealer exhaled slowly, his posture softening as though the weight of the room had finally pressed too hard. "It was all too easy," he said quietly. "He trusted me. Everyone did. The old fool kept his treasures under lock, but his trust was the easiest key of all." Dr. Haydock shook his head. "And you poisoned him for a stamp." Hale's mouth curved into something that might have been a smile once, long ago. "For a fortune," he said. "One small piece of paper worth more than all the words written about it." Miss Marple's eyes were calm, almost sorrowful. "Greed," she said softly, "always trusts its own reflection and never notices who's standing behind it." The constable closed the case, snapping the clasps shut with finality. The sound echoed like the click of a lock-sealing fate. Greed always trusts its own reflection. The storm had passed, leaving the village wrapped in a brittle calm. Inside the post office, lamplight glowed against the frost-blurred windows, throwing soft reflections across the desk where the truth now lay assembled. Miss Marple stood beside it, her hands folded neatly before her, as if about to deliver a Sunday lesson rather than the conclusion of a murder. Constable Fred Locke hovered nearby, his notebook forgotten in his hand, eyes fixed on her as she spoke. Dr. Haydock leaned against the wall, his face drawn and thoughtful. The room smelled faintly of extinguished gas and old paper, the scent of secrets finally aired. "It began," Miss Marple said, "with a missing letter, a small theft, insignificant to anyone but the person desperate enough to commit it. Miss Carr borrowed from her savings to help her brother. Mr. Blank www.com. Bryce, seeing her distress, saw also an opportunity. He conspired with Mr. Hale, the dealer, to conceal the shortage. Hale, you see, required access to something far more valuable, Mr. Stokes's collection." She moved to the desk, touching the adding machine lightly. Mr. Stokes was an obstacle, not cruel, not foolish, simply incorruptible. And incorruptible men are the hardest to deceive. Hale decided to remove him, but not through violence. He preferred precision. Her voice stayed calm, each word clipped and deliberate. He began by grounding the alarm wire. That ensured no signal could escape the building should the gas ignite or a cry be heard. Then, while pretending to assist with valuations, he replaced the typewriter ribbon with one soaked in cyanide solution, a poison invisible to the eye, slow to act, and silent. Each time Mr. Stokes pressed a key, a small vapor was released. Death printed line by line. Fred swallowed hard, his gaze darting toward the adding machine. So that's why he never stirred. He was breathing his own end all along. "Precisely," said Miss Marple. Once the deed was done, Hale typed a final entry, his own business address, to suggest an innocent connection. He then left through the parcel hatch, locking the door behind him with Mr. Stokes's duplicate key. Tidy, precise, unhurried. Each act arranged with the discipline of a collector cataloguing his specimens. Dr. Haydock shook his head slowly. "Ingenious. Cold-blooded." Miss Marple nodded. "Evil often is." Fred looked at her with something between admiration and disbelief. "You've a way of seeing things others don't, Miss Marple. I'd never have guessed it." She smiled faintly. "I don't see more, Mr. Locke. I simply notice what's out of place and what's too perfectly in it." The clock on the mantel struck the half-hour, the chimes soft and solemn. Outside, the snow had begun again, thin flakes drifting past the lamplight like bits of paper torn from heaven. Fred closed his notebook, finally writing the last line. Case concluded. Evidence secured. He hesitated, then looked back at her. Orders restored, then. Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the lifeless adding machine. Restored. Yes. she said quietly, but not repaired. Some things, Mr. Locke, once spoiled by greed, can never be made whole again. Order restored, but not repaired. Evening descended gently upon street. Merry Mead, wrapping the village in soft rain and the hush that follows resolution. The storm that had churned through the day was gone, leaving only a quiet patter against the window panes and the steady glow of the fire in the hearth. Inside the sitting room of the Blue Lantern Inn, peace had returned, not perfect but familiar. Miss Marple sat close to the fire, knitting resting on her lap, a cup of tea steaming beside her. The lamplight flickered against the porcelain, the pattern of ivy leaves catching small flashes of gold. Across from her sat Dolly Bantry, ever curious, her shawl drawn snug about her shoulders. "It's a strange thing," Dolly said, shaking her head. "All that fuss over stamps and ledgers. Such quiet things to hide such wickedness." Miss Marple smiled faintly, her eyes following the slow swirl of the tea. "Most wickedness begins quietly, dear. That's why it lasts so long before being found out." Dolly leaned forward, her curiosity overcoming her restraint. "But how did you know, Jane? Before the doctor, before the constable, you already knew something wasn't right." Marple's needles clicked once, twice, before she answered. "Because people repeat their habits, Dolly. They think themselves clever, but they seldom change their pattern, only the reason behind it. Hale arranged his crime as he arranged his stamps, by value, by sequence, by control. That sort of mind never leaves a thing untidy, and yet—" She paused, smiling into the fire. "Even perfect order has a scent. I've learned to trust it." Dolly gave a small sigh. "You make it sound so simple." "Oh, it never is," Marple said. "Truth rarely arrives with a trumpet. It comes quietly, like a letter slipped under the door when no one's looking." Outside, the rain grew steadier, tapping a patient rhythm against the panes. The fire gave a small sigh, settling into embers. Fred Locke's voice echoed faintly from the hallway, thanking the innkeeper for his help. The business of justice paperwork, signatures, reports would carry on long after the village had gone to sleep. Dr. Haydock had taken his leave already, his coat collar turned up against the chill. Before going, he'd said, "You have a peculiar gift, Miss Marple, a mind like a detective's." She had smiled then, the same quiet smile she wore now. "No, Doctor. Only a mind that listens." Dolly poured another cup of tea, the liquid amber under the lamplight. "Well," she said softly, "I'm glad you were listening tonight." Marple looked toward the rain-blurred window where the faint light of the telegraph pole gleamed like a candle in the mist. "The village will sleep easier now," she said, "though I doubt it will ever quite forget." At that, the host's voice returns, calm and warm. "Thank you for joining the curious case. Until next time, may truth find you before it's lost." The kettle clicked in the distance, a soft sound that folded neatly into the rhythm of rain. Truth travels quietly like a letter without a stamp. Welcome to the curious case. Wrap yourself in a blanket, dear listener, the night is long, and the kettle has just begun to sing. Here, we wander through quiet lanes and lamplight windows, where every whisper carries a story. Settle in, let the ticking of the clock and the rustle of paper guide your thoughts. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from tonight? A city flat? A countryside room? Or perhaps somewhere in between? Wherever you are, this tale will find you. Even small villages keep large secrets. The morning had come pale and rimmed with frost. Mist curled low over the cobbled street, softening the outlines of lamplight and chimney smoke. From the narrow lane beyond the harbour, the quiet rhythm of carriage wheels echoed